In our previous video, we ran out of time before learning about the importance of documenting training and skill maintenance, whether safety volunteers sit with the rest of the congregation during services or stand guard at assigned posts, and perhaps most important, we didn't yet cover creation of a use of force policy. Let's return now to our conversation with attorney and advisory board member Emanuel Kapelsohn and learn from his experience. So Manny, after the team member has completed their training and is ready to put the name badge on, will they be mentored by an experienced team member?
For the first number of times that they come to serve a security function, they may work up in the communication center, because we have a room where the person is coordinating all the radio traffic. And keep in mind, we've got our safe team and our medical team on one channel. We've got parking lot attendants on a different channel. We've got building maintenance people on a different channel. So a parking lot attendant may see something that causes them some concern. And they may radio in and they'll get the communication center or the operations pastor or someone like that on it. And if that person thinks that safe team needs to respond to that, they'll put it out on our channel. So we're not monitoring everything that's happening on every channel, because it's a busy place with multiple channels working. But when a team member is new to the job, they may spend a couple of sessions up there in the communication center, so they see the security video camera coverage and what's covered. They hear the radio traffic. People on the safe team who come in and check in, we sign up ahead of time. In other words, during the week, you'll sign up online and say, I'll be there this Sunday for the 11 o'clock service, or I'll be there for the 8 o'clock and 9:30 services. And then when you check in, you'll check in, and the person from the communication center will say, fine, I'm assigning you to, Sierra 3. That's an evacuation post on the south side of the building. If the building had to be evacuated in a fire or in some other emergency, that's position that you go to maintain security there. Maybe it's an area where children are evacuated to, or something like that. So you get assignments. And then if you are in and out the rest of the congregation, not in the communication center, the first time or two that you're there, you'll be working with someone else, sort of like a field training officer in a police department. Very, very similar to that. I mentioned written policy.
Yes, please.
We don't teach that in the 3-day, the 17-hour class. The 17-hour class I mentioned, we start on Friday night with classroom, and then we do Saturday morning in the classroom and afternoon on the range, and then Sunday morning is service, so we don't have anything then, but Sunday afternoon we're back on the range. And that's how we get our 17 hours of training in, and it's a good solid 17 hours. People get a written 3-ring binder of materials. They get some of that material sent to them ahead of time to study. It's a good and rigorous program. We also have a written use of force and firearms policy. And I suggest that any house of worship should have that if they have an armed congregant team. I mentioned before that the policy governs things like what weapons you can carry or not carry, what kind of ammunition you have to carry in it. Policy also specifies qualification intervals. What happens if someone fails to qualify? What rules do we follow? In other words, when do we use deadly force? It may not be the same as just saying whenever state law permits it. There are some uses of force that may be permitted by state law that we don't want to permit in our congregation. We may want to be more restrictive, or some other congregation may want to be more restrictive. We make it clear in the policy that there are things like protection of mere property, and I'm using that word mere, or apprehension of criminal suspects that are typically not our job. That's for the police. If someone is out in the parking lot vandalizing a car, the police need to be called. Maybe someone from the security team or safe team goes out there and yells, "Hey, what are you doing? Get out of there. You know, the police are on the way." But that's not a situation where one of our people goes and tries to make, in effect, a citizen's arrest of someone committing criminal mischief. That's for the police to do. Maybe we act as a deterrent. Maybe we get a good description of that person. Similarly, someone who commits a crime and is running away, it's not our job to catch them. Our policy makes it clear that we may need to detain that person if it's necessary for the safety of the congregation. In other words, someone comes in and shoots or stabs someone in the hallway outside the service and is now running down the hall with the weapon in their hand still. They're not just a fleeing criminal, they're someone who's a current active deadly threat to others. But that's the reason we're apprehending them. It's not because we're police. It's not because we want to see them brought to justice. It's because we want to make sure they don't hurt someone else. That's our job. So the policy covers that. Our policy is a little bit over 30 pages long. It's a lengthy policy. It's quite comprehensive. And it covers the things you carry when you're on duty. It covers your name badge and your radio and your pepper gel and your gun. And you're required to carry at least one reload for the gun, one spare magazine or one speed loader, in addition to your loaded weapon. Your holster has to be an approved holster because we want to make sure that it's safe, that your gun isn't going to fall out, in public or something like that. We've never had a problem of that sort, but the policy is an important thing. And it's guidance for the team members. It's liability protection for the team members and for the congregation. It's the game plan by which people operate. So that's important. And your policy, if you have a legal counsel, an attorney who represents your congregation, the policy certainly needs to be looked at by your legal counsel. Your legal counsel may or may not have a clue about armed security or armed confrontations or firearms. So you'll have to figure that out when the time comes. But clearly it's something that your legal counsel should pass on and agree to. And in our case, the insurance companies, the insurance carriers wanted to know that we had a policy and they wanted to see our policy. So that's important. I mentioned the kinds of in-service training we have. Unless you have further questions about that, I would go on to something a little different.
You do need to requalify this frequently. You do need to keep your CPR card current, these types of things. And what do you do if the person lapses? And what are those in-service requirements like? Is it burdensome?
Because we have a 35-member safe team, it's a big job. And our pastor who's in charge of this, who is also the team leader and is also a certified police firearms instructor, and is also a chaplain for the local state police barracks. I mean, he's got a lot of different hats that he wears. He has a whole matrix, computer matrix, that keeps track of, when is Manny Kapelsohn's concealed carry permit running out, or when did I last qualify at CPR or something like that. And we have a number of meetings per year, and at those meetings, he'll publish that matrix, and it'll show who's coming up for renewal of this or who's overdue for that, and he'll hand it out to people as a reminder if necessary, and then he'll actually remind people if necessary. If someone doesn't keep up, it's just like someone who doesn't come to the training sessions. Eventually, you've got to say, hey, what's going on here? Are you having a problem? Do you still have enough time to be on this team? Is there something else we should know about? Well, if you're going to be on the team, you need to do this and this and this and this to keep your credentials and your training updated. So that's important, and it's a good question. I would talk a moment or two about management and supervision of the team. At any moment in time that we have team members present at the facility, someone's in charge of them. I mentioned that they have radios and that someone in the communications center is monitoring and managing that radio traffic. And we may get a call that just says something like, command, I have a child who twisted his ankle in the west hallway. Can we have somebody from the medical team respond? Or sometimes we'll have a person who faints during a service, loses consciousness, or we've had people who are diabetic who have a diabetic attack, or some other problem, or someone has chest pains and needs an ambulance to be called. And that's common radio traffic that involves safe team, medical team, and so forth. Well, you've got to have standard operating procedures. You've got to have someone in charge. If you have a radio call that says someone just twisted their ankle in the west hallway, you don't want to have all 7 of your armed security people and both of your medical people all converge on the west hallway. Who's protecting the rest of the congregants and the rest of the activities that are going on? And especially if you may get a call that, hey, I have a person of interest here. I have a person whom I don't recognize as being a regular attendee here. Of course, that's not unusual. We have many visitors on any Sunday. But here's a person I don't recognize, and they seem to be unsteady on their feet, maybe staggering a little bit. I wonder whether they're intoxicated. Here's their description. I'm going to keep an eye on this person, or whatever. Again, that's something that the SAFE team needs to know about. The person who's in charge of the SAFE team needs to know about it. Maybe that's the person who's going to make the decision whether this person should be asked to leave or not. Maybe that's the person who's going to go up to this individual and say, hey, are you feeling okay? Make a judgment about whether they are intoxicated or not. After all, we're a house of worship. We want to be welcoming to people. We don't want to necessarily eject people because they're having a personal problem. Some of those, and in fact, for the most part, those decisions are left to the clergy at this congregation, at Good Church. There may be someone sitting in the middle of a service that has 800 other people in it, and this person is speaking out loud, doing something that you or I might consider disrupting the service. At Good Church, that's not something until they do something that appears to be a threat to people's physical safety. Until that, if they're just disrupting the service, no matter how disruptive it is, that's not something where the SAFE team goes and evicts that person from the church. That's something where the SAFE team may get closer to that person, but ultimately the pastor makes that decision. And the pastor may actually stop the service and step down from the lectern and go up to that person and saying, are you having a problem today? Is there something we can do to help you? And the pastor is the one in that congregation who ultimately makes the decision whether that person's going to be allowed to remain, or whether that person is going to be asked to leave, or whether that person is going to be asked to come off into a quiet place to be counseled by another member of the clergy, or what it might be. I see you have a question or a comment.
Well, and so the team member detects that something's unusual, doesn't know what it is. Is he or she going to leave his assigned post to keep eyes on the person who causes concern? Because now that leaves the door wide open. What do we do?
It depends on what the post is. For instance, we have the daycare for the youngest children, and that's behind the locked door, a hallway with classrooms on either side. And there are children in that area ranging from infants to 3 or 4 years old. Their parents drop them off there. There are teachers in each classroom or people to care for the infants while the parents are in the service. It's a very good system. The parents have to register for it. And when they check in each day, they get a two-part pressure stick label. They slap one piece of the label on their kid's back. That's got the identifying number and information, and the parent keeps the other half. When the parent comes to pick up their child at the end of the service, they have to have the matching half. Okay, so Aunt Sally can't show up and say, I'm taking the child out. Neither can the estranged spouse or whoever it might be. It has to be the person who's in the system as the one who's allowed to pick up that child. Well, that's behind locked doors. And we have one of our safe team members posted right outside of the children's area. That person will not leave that area. So if there's something that's going on, short of some incredibly unusual situation, the safe team member who's at that children's post will not leave that children's post. That's their spot. Other people may be circulating through the facility or maybe sitting in the service, and they'll tell the communication center, for this service, I'll be sitting in the right rear of the main sanctuary. That's someone who's free to move if they need to move. But if they are going to do that, they'll typically tell the communication center. They'll call in, they'll say, Command, I've got a person of interest here, and this is the situation, and they're now moving down the hallway, and I'm following them. The communication center will immediately pick that up on the video cameras, and they'll be watching it, and they'll say, I see it. And sometimes they'll say, I see it. It's okay. I know that person. Or a couple of weeks ago, we had two people in the main service, congregants, who stood throughout the whole service. One far up in the front, close to the lectern or podium, and one in the back. One we knew, but it was a concern. So it came across the radio. The man who's standing up in the left rear of the service has a back problem. He can't sit down. It's okay. Don't worry about him. We know him. And the one who was up front standing, we didn't know about. And so one or more safe team members kind of sat in that part of the service so they could keep a close eye on him in case it turned out to be something bad. So there's a supervisor in charge for every event. And that's your team leader, if you want to call it your watch commander, to take a term from the police world. That's the person who's in charge. I've gotten a radio call that says there's someone out in the parking lot. They're parked there, and it kind of looks like they're living out of their car. And they've been parked there all night. I'd like to go up and speak to this person. Would you come with me? So that more than one person is going up. But you don't want your whole team going up there. It's number one, it's more likely to incite high tension. And the other thing is the team is needed elsewhere. But you may want more than just one of you for security reasons or to be a witness of what is said or whatever it might be. So those decisions are typically left to the watch commander or the team leader in charge. An obvious exception is an active killer, someone who comes in with a weapon and then you respond immediately. You don't have to get permission to respond. Something that's life-threatening is responded to immediately. And thankfully, we've not had that situation, but it has occurred elsewhere.
Well, and you're protecting against it. I think my biggest challenge with all of this, the thing I'm having the hardest time wrapping my head around, is how it scales. You guys have got such a great resource at Good Church. that I just don't know how that scales down to even the congregation with 500 people on the books, but 300 show up every Sunday morning. The 150 person Adventist church that meets on Sabbath morning, and really only 75 of them show up. I don't know how that scales down to our smaller faith.
It's got to be addressed. I mean, it's an excellent question. It's got to be addressed on an instance by instance basis. So, for instance, a congregation that I was affiliated with before Good Church, who had a fraction of the people coming to a service on the weekend, we would try to have at least two people there. Two people is a magnitude of more than twice as good as one person. Two people can back each other up. One can communicate while the other addresses a problem. One can serve as a contact to a potential threat while the other is a cover officer. Two is much better than twice as good as one. But our goal there was to always have at least two. I've told you at Good Church, we try to have at least 5 from the armed team and at least 1 from the medical team. That may turn into, at any given time, 7 armed people and 2 from the medical team. But 5 and 1 is the minimum that our operations director is striving for. If he doesn't have at least 5 who've said they're coming to the 8 o'clock service this Sunday, he'll get on the start texting people or phoning people and saying, I've only got 3 people coming at 8 o'clock. Can you come in and fill in? I know you've signed up for the 9:30, but we've got plenty at the 9:30. Could you come for the 8 o'clock instead? So someplace it may be 1 person present, which is certainly a lot better than none. Some places it may be 2 present, which is more than twice as good as 1. And some places this. And then we may have other events. For instance, we have an annual Christmas tree lighting ceremony. Women in the congregation bake in excess of 10,000 cookies. We have a huge tent full of cookies of every description, and coffee and tea and lemonade and hot apple cider and hot cocoa and so forth. And this is not just for our congregation, it's open to the community. There's a beautiful outdoor Christmas tree that's strung with lights, and there are choirs that sing, and at an appropriate time, the Christmas tree is illuminated. There are games for kids, a bounce house and a climbing wall and other kinds of games. We have a horse-drawn wagon where kids get a ride, like a hay ride. There are singing and dancing activities and other activities going on inside where it's warmer in case it's cold out that evening. So there are thousands of people there for this. Well, for something like that, we won't just have 5 of our team members present. We'll have a lot more than that. And a lot more than 1 medical team member as well. So we'll have a lot of people present for something that's likely to draw a big crowd, just as we will for something like Christmas or Easter services where the place is more packed than it usually is.
Indeed. Now you brought up something that I think bears going into a slightly different direction. Many church organizations have church schools, maybe K-9 or something of that nature, because they like to nurture their children at those tender ages. Does the SAFE team have any role in making sure that those children are safe during their educational process?
Good Church doesn't have a church school. It does have daycare, but just for very young children. And there are 1 or more regular employees of the church who are trained and state licensed and armed, so that while that is going on during the week, they are present. There are some other churches in our area, and I know there are churches all over the country that run church schools. We have one not far from us that goes K through 12. And probably a volunteer armed congregant team will not suffice for that, because most of those volunteers are going to have jobs on the weekdays, unless we have people who are retired or something like that. Probably places with church schools are going to need to think about having someone whose regular job it is to be there Monday through Friday when school is in session and when activities are in progress. And that may be some staff members who are trained, or it may be some people, who have other functions, like maybe they're also a teacher or also an administrator. Or it may be people who are just there to be resource officers, security officers, what have you. We have some very stringent statutes on that in Pennsylvania, which are unfortunate because it limits what church schools, parochial schools, and so forth can do, and it limits it in a way that makes it difficult for them to provide adequate security. Now, at Faith Church, as an example, we have those staff members there during the daytime, during the week, when daycare is in progress, and there may be other activities, women's groups that meet or what have you. But we also have a heavy dose of evening activities on Monday nights, Wednesday nights, and Sunday nights. And the effort we make is to try to have a safe team member present each of those nights, so there isn't just a receptionist at the front door and no one there except to call the police. We try to have a safe team member there if possible at those times, and to have them have their radio so that they're in communication with the the receptionist at the front door and with the maintenance people who are on duty and so forth, so that there's some communication and ability, because it's a multi-story facility and there are activities that may be going on the third floor or whatever. The radio allows a teacher on the third floor to call you on the first floor and say, we've got a problem here. It may be a medical problem, it may be whatever.
Well, you bring up a good point, and the church family does have a number of activities outside of that worship service that it does bear making decisions about how best to care for them. I have another question that is not as easy. What about the person who isn't able to serve on the SAFE team for any variety of reasons? Maybe their health doesn't allow it, but they carry a gun every day of their life. What is his or her responsibility to his church family, to just keep it completely secret, or should there be a conversation with the clergyman? How does this work, Manny?
That's a wonderful question, and of course it's founded in your experience with all kinds of people who carry guns for all kinds of reasons. And I love it when I'm speaking to the board of directors or the board of trustees or the clergy board or whatever it is of some congregation, and one of them says to me, well, I don't think we should have an armed congregant security team, because I don't want anyone carrying a gun in the church or in the synagogue. And I say to them, guess what? You have a lot of people who are carrying guns. You just don't know who they are, and sometimes they're shocked to hear that, but that's the truth. There are people who are carrying guns who have concealed carry permits. There are people who are carrying guns that never had a concealed carry permit. Mrs. McGillicuddy, who's got a little revolver in her purse, and she's carried it for 50 years since her husband gave it to her, whatever. Some of those people are trained and safe. Some of them are untrained and unsafe. But you have a lot of people potentially carrying guns. In small churches with small congregations that I've been a member of in the past, I've gone up to the pastor or the minister at a point where I've developed a little bit of relationship with them, a little bit of rapport, and they knew who I was, where I say to them, I just want you to know, this is who I am, this is what I do, and I'm always carrying a gun. So if there's a problem here, you should know that I'm armed. And in each of those cases, they've said, oh, good, I'm glad to know that. Please keep carrying your gun to church or whatever, or to synagogue or what have you, because I go to both at times. Um, a bigger problem is something like Safe Church, where we've got 5 or 6 or 7 armed SAFE team members. What would happen if there were ever an armed attack, an active killer situation? Because we've got SAFE team members who would likely be drawing their guns, and we might have congregants who are drawing their guns. We might not recognize all those congregants. They may be visitors there for the first time, or someone who's been there more than once, but I just don't recognize them, or someone I see from behind, and so I can't see their face, but I see their hand out holding a gun, That's a potential problem. I mentioned to you that we carry security sashes, the DSM sashes. So after the situation has gone on for a few seconds, we would hope that our members deploy their sashes so it's obvious that they are members of the security team. But what about all the other people? One approach, of course, different congregations take different approaches. Some post a sign that says, no firearms are allowed in here. The so-called quote-unquote gun-free zone. I'm not in favor of that, because there are no gun-free zones, and they become kind of free fire zones for active killers. It becomes an announcement. Some congregations post signs that say things like, these premises are protected by armed security, try to hurt us at your own risk. I think that probably establishes a kind of an atmosphere that I'm not sure I'd want to be in, and most don't. One thing we do at Safe Church is this. Once a year, we have an evacuation drill for the children. The adults don't evacuate during the service, but they're told, 15 minutes into the service, you will hear an alarm go off, and all the children in the daycare area and in the children's activities and the Sunday school classes will all be evacuated from the building by their teachers in an orderly fashion. It's like a fire drill in your school that you went to, and we time it, and we have SAFE team members outside in the assembly areas where the class to which the classes are brought and so forth, and we check out the parking lot ahead of time to make sure it's all safe and everything else. But the occasion of that evacuation drill allows the pastor to say something else to the congregation, which is, the pastor says, by the way, and I'm paraphrasing, he says something like, by the way, many of you know this already, but in case you don't know this, we'd like to let you know, we have a security team that is very carefully selected and very highly trained, and they are trained to respond to any kinds of problems we might have here, and including armed, violent problems. And if any of you happen to be carrying guns, and something happens and you feel that you need to draw your gun or use your gun to protect yourself or your loved one sitting next to you, by all means, do what you have to do, but don't go to involve yourself in the problem. If the problem is across the room or down the hall, don't go to involve yourself in that. We have people who are trained to do that. And by involving yourself, you may create more of a problem. Okay, so you get the idea. People are told there are people here prepared to deal with this. That's not your job. If you think you need to draw your gun as a congregant because the guy with the machete is right in front of you and your children, then by all means do what you have to do, but don't go try to solve the problem. That's our responsibility. And that's a way that we've dealt with it. And by the way, this program at Good Church has been in place now for about 12 years. So it's got quite a good history, and has dealt with many kinds of problems, and thanks to God, not an active killer event, but many kinds of problems, including ones where people have needed ambulances, or where the medical team has treated them, or where the state police have been called, or whatever else has happened. And it's been an excellent program. So these are some of the things that I think people have to think about. And then in terms of resources, in addition to this podcast, which should serve as a good resource, both of the large insurance companies that I mentioned, Church Mutual and Brotherhood Mutual, both have written materials that I believe are available. I don't know if they're available only to people who insure with them or to the public at large, having to do with security at houses of worship, and dealing with potential problems of the kinds we've been discussing, written policies, training programs, etc. If you go on the internet today, you will find many training programs offered for house of worship security teams. Our state here, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, is actually offering programs several times a year, internet programs, through our, I think it's our state attorney general's office that sponsors these programs, and they're for church security people, and they discuss various issues. They're wonderful. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman is a lecturer who lectures all over the country on this subject. If you go on the internet and you look up things like sheepdog or sheepdog security, some of these organizations have newsletters that are free that they'll send you every month or more often than that. There are many kinds of resources available, and there are publications of the federal government on this subject, on house of worship security, that you can get for free for the asking. So, don't be alone, and don't feel like you have to invent the wheel all by yourself. There are many sources of information and many resources of which you can avail yourself.
And those resources that you listed, it really brings back what I think is an unspoken lesson in so much of what you said today. So little of this, such a tiny little piece of it, has to do with the guns and the shooting. While that is indeed probably the most serious part of it, there's such a huge array of other concerns that you're really not looking out for your fellow worshipers very well if you ignore the medical side, the are you doing well today, the people side, the heart side of it. And I think that by bringing up those other resources, you're inviting us to have a little broader knowledge base, to be aware that it's much more than carrying a gun.
Absolutely. Years ago, I was a director of security in charge of an 11-man, actually 10 men and one woman, executive protection team for one of the wealthiest women in the world. And I can remember when we were teaching things like the Heimlich maneuver, saying to my people, it's much more likely that you're going to have to use this to keep our principal from choking to death on a bite of steak in a restaurant than that you're going to have to use your gun to shoot a terrorist or a kidnapper. It's so true. Our medical team is used much more than the SAFE team is. And when the SAFE team is used, it's often to assist someone who's fallen down, or help someone who's having a problem of some sort, relocate a child with their parents or whatever it might be, not because of a violent attack. So you have to be realistic. And if you have people on your security team who are only there because they intend to have gunfights with terrorists, you've probably got the wrong person there.
And they're going to be gravely disappointed because I think you put off a preparedness attitude, and you don't look like an easy target, and that all works to the good. Manny, any last questions? Any last things you wish that I'd ask you about? What do you think our takeaway needs to be?
Well, our takeaway needs to be that um, different kinds of programs may be appropriate for different sizes and types of houses of worship, uh, but that organization, supervision, written policy, proper selection of people, proper training of people, that is an ongoing process. All of these things are important. And your goal of making it a safer place for everyone to come worship in is a wonderful goal, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of thought, but it's not beyond anybody's ability. With the right intentions and a little thought and a little energy, you can achieve a tremendous boost in safety.
That's inspiring. Manny, thank you so much for spending this time. I know your time's valuable, and you've been so generous with it. Your experience and the overview from the legal aspects that you bring to this, it's just an amazing gift you've given to us. Thank you very, very much.
It's great being with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.